Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Bohurt, where we get out there to everyone does Bohurt and talk about the important things that you need to know about. So, leading on from some of the previous episodes where we've talked about helmet and other bits and pieces, we're going to talk about some more kit today. Namely, we'll talk about your arms, shoulders down to your hands. With me today, we've got Piers and Anthony. They've been on the show before. You know who they are. How are you doing, guys?
How are you doing? Not bad, thank you.
Not bad, thanks.
Cheers. Good. So, I think arms are often they're a neglected piece of kit, the arm itself, but the shoulders and hands are often overly spoken about because they're very essential bits of kit. The first thing we'll talk about is shoulders, because I think they're quite important and they're glossed over in a way and often thought about in the wrong way entirely. I myself have gone through a lot of sets of shoulders in my time. I'm sure you guys have as well, from simple cups to absolutely massive tea trays that have bent around my entire body and stopped me doing anything. Yeah, those exactly. What are your guys' experience with shoulders and what do you use now?
So for myself personally, way back when I started, when I had a pair of white rose arms, which isn't really what you should start with, but those articulated arms had cup shoulders, which are very simple. Like very, very simple, which is a single cup, and the idea was the arms went up to that point.
Yeah.
I then later on went to replace these with your kind of bowl shoulders, articulated shoulders, which have multiple plates. But the theme with all of those is none of them had gap protection, or they were all very much kind of like tight and down.
Yeah.
And they didn't move very well. As I moved on, I ended up with a kind of more broader early 15th century shoulder that comes around, covers the gap, and then comes down away. And the shoulders that I have at the moment are a two-piece kind of bowl from the early 15th century, where they actually cover sufficiently on the front, on the midpoint of the scapula to the front here. So it's a bit of collarbone as well, because it sits right there. And then the brigandine just does the rest, so you end up with no vulnerability.
And how about yourself, Piers? What are you using? What have you used before?
I started off with floating shoulders that were tabbed onto my brig. Moved on to some early 14th century shoulders, which is a singular large half bowl effectively over the shoulder with three lames articulated underneath it. I then articulated those into my arms. It's similar to what I've got now, actually, but I've got a much better fitting version of. But I've seen the Space Marine shoulders. I've seen people bugging about with all sorts of shoulders that they think they'll cover every single gap with, and then they can't fit underneath their tabard or won't let them move their arms properly and everything like that. But yeah.
So an important thing that I think you've hit on there is the attachment of the shoulder. It's because people measure up for shoulders and all of that, and then they'll get it and they can't figure out how to put it onto their body, and that's where a lot of mistakes happen. Like I've had it on my Gambo, I've had it on my brig. I've seen people poke holes through their gambeson for all sorts of weird stuff, or attach it to padded gorgets that go on top of their armor, and all sorts of hybrid things like that. They get really weird.
Or the BDSM cross harnesses that go shoulder to shoulder across the those ones as well.
Yeah, I've used that as well.
Yeah, give me both.
Travel.
Yeah.
Apologies.
But as in all things, I think it pays to keep it as simple as possible. Look, at the moment, mine are attached to a point on my brig, because then I know I've got plate crossover and the gap's gone. Not all of it, but rather than messing about with loads of leather or loads of thonging and messing about, I always like to keep it simple.
In general, if the brig's made correctly, when you attach your shoulders to your brig, you will find it's positioned perfectly. If you need to attach it to your gambeson because your brig doesn't come out far enough, you've got a shoulder gap, which will be covered by an aventail if you have one. But when you tilt your head up or your head gets tilted down, there's going to be gaps all over the place. It's not appropriate.
Yeah, asking for trouble. So the the ones Anthony referred to as a BDSM harness, the ones that I currently have and the ones that I had before this set, where every part of the arm all the way up to the shoulder is articulated via leather straps or through rivets and then through leather straps from the left arm all the way through to the right arm. Now, the good side of that is back when all the kit was not necessarily perfect fitting and when the kit was of a lower standard, that did the business. It stopped your arm slipping down, although a better way of doing that is to put a leather cuff on your gambeson. Pro tip there, kids. And it also stopped people pulling your shoulders or anything like that out the way when they're fighting you. The downside of that is it's a really good way of getting yourself choked out as well. The straps are a constant irritant, and having so many moving parts or so many straps at this point is asking for some form of failure somewhere, with a strap being torn through or it getting jammed into something else it's not supposed to be jammed into.
Yeah, definitely. I will always err on the side of simplicity for everything now. Not even for the setting it up, it's for quick repairs or sorting something out. When something fails and you're telling a support that doesn't know your kit to get something fixed between rounds, if you've got a complicated setup, it's not going to happen. If it's simple and any layman can look at it and goes, string goes in hole, holds armor on, you're fine. Moving on from attachment is to the actual size and shape of everything. And as I say, we've all been hit on the shoulder gap. Everyone knows it's there. Yep. Everyone goes for it. We've all been hit on it and said, I don't like that. And that's why shoulders have got bigger and bigger over a period. And you'll find entry-level fighters will have whatever they're given, and then they'll try and look for big shoulders to cover that gap. But I had massive shoulders, and I discarded them after the first high-level fight I had in them because I just couldn't move as well. And prevention is better than a cure, I found. For big shoulders, they might not hit my gap. You're going to move around enough, no matter how big those shoulders are, to expose the gap. And it's better to not give it to them, if that makes sense. You guys had similar experiences with that?
So for me personally, I never went that enormous. I think the largest I went was the pair the set I had before my current one, which was integrated with the upper arms because it was floating, and those were big enough to cover the gap, but not big enough so that if you were to kind of do this, then you'd have a gap. Not like one of those semi-Milanese pieces, which is not designed to go on anything other than one of two things. One, a full white armor, and two, one of those lovely pieces of artwork where you see the black armor with the brigandine and the sallets. And that's the only two places you really see them. And even then, the second one is not actually a Milanese shoulder, because when you look at it, it's kind of that's what the Space Marine shoulders are actually based on, but they're made bigger and more wraparound. And the thing is, it's just kind of like, you have a massive shoulder. Great. Are you jousting? No. Why do you have it?
Why?
Ultimately, as soon as you start packing on a lot of metal like that, you do reduce your maneuverability. And there's a thing that people don't necessarily realize, which is that you can feel that underneath a tabard. And it's very easy to actually get your fingers underneath those. And as soon as someone has their fingers underneath your massive shoulder, it controls your movement a lot better than just having a big, sheet of fabric. And there's a lot to go wrong. Also, it tends to put holes in your tabard. It makes maintenance of your tabard really laborious.
And it eats your brig as well.
Does it?
My bigger shoulders did it, where the plate of my brig was and my shoulder was moving on it.
Oh, right.
The fabric in the middle just got eaten. But genuinely, some of my favourite shoulders I've ever had have just been a simple cup.
Yeah,
big enough to cover it, pointed on at the right place, simple as. I mean, I'm not going to win a beauty contest, but Bohurt's not a beauty contest.
Right.
And in my opinion, you go to Battle of the Nations trying to win the best armor is like going to an MMA event and trying to win best shorts of the evening. It's not.
You're in the wrong place, aren't you? Really?
Yeah. Full kudos to those that have the beautiful armor. Great, but I've tried big shoulders and it done nothing for me. I hated it. soon as I got into a bit of a spicy situation, trying to move my arm to be able to deliver a decent hit, just wound me right up. And I remember sending Sophie off on a manic run to get me some other shoulders before the next fight started.
If you want to have a bit of a laugh, see who's won the best armor competitions and see who still currently fights in it. I think the answer is 0.
Unless you're really addicted to that sort of armor. Fine. If that's what you enjoy, that's what you enjoy. But it's not
Now,
what we're trying to
the other
achieve
side
here.
of the simple shoulders is also the homemade shoulders or homemade attachments and adaptions to shoulders. Now, I don't see much of it these days because the amount of kit you can get and the price you can get it for is vastly expanded, whilst the price has gone right down. But I do remember sewing rondels onto the back of my gambeson, with the idea being, along with several others, with the idea being that the shoulders would rest on that rondel, as would my brig, and it would keep any gap from forming or cover any gap that did form. Cracking idea in theory, as is often the case, and in practice, it just massively hindered mobility. I mean, it meant I couldn't move my shoulders back or roll them or anything like that. It took a huge amount of power out of my hit, and this was back when there wasn't much power in that hit anyway. So I was doing no one any services there at all.
You say I remember buying a pair of shoulders that weren't quite big enough to me. It left an inch or so gap on my arm, and I filled that with metal rulers. 1mm stainless steel. So I bent those into place and riveted them on just to expand them a bit, and that lasted a while. But it's not necessary now. It's not like when we started the sport, you just threw money into the ether via Western Union into Eastern Europe and hope kit turned up.
It's the Western Union era needs to die. Some people still do it.
There's plenty of experienced armourers with great reputations now, and the prices have come right down.
Yeah.
But shoulders bigger isn't always better. So if we move on there onto the actual arm harness itself, there's 2 main types of articulated or floating. I myself prefer articulated for Bohurt. I've got a set of floating for pro fights, but for Bohurt, I just think articulate's worth it for the extra protection you get. Some people argue there, but you guys, what's your experience?
I think you're oversimplifying it to start with, because floating armor comes in various different forms anyway, and there are examples of floating armor with integrated leather strapping that is closer to articulated while still being floating, and that's as late as, I want to say, I've seen it in 1385, which is pretty late for floating armor on harnesses with articulated legs. And with articulated arms, there's multiple grades of that as well. So you've got some of the very static ones where your internal arm rotates and the cuff stays static. And then you've got some of the advanced ones, which are more late 15th, where they've got riveted positions so that when you got like the floating wrist
rivet in there.
And the thing is, my experience with non-fitted floating arms is that they are absolute trash. And non-fitted articulated arms are absolute trash, and you should stay the hell away from them. I've never had made to measure articulated arms. I know people that have had made to measure articulated arms, and the results have been very good, including that rotation that I've mentioned. But the one thing I'll say is, if you break an articulated arm at a tournament, you're out. It's fixable, but if you lose 3 rivets, it's not as if that's an armor failure. There's no debate. It's not as if, a bit's slightly loose. It's you have a hole and your plates are coming apart, and your injury risk just goes up. Whereas floating, frankly, you can smash the side of floating armor and it's not going to separate it from the rest of its components because it's not attached with rivets. So in my personal opinion, a solid piece of floating armor that's well made and has internal leather attachments, so you only end up with thonging in 2 places, I would say, on the upper and on the elbow cop, and the forearm is attached to the elbow cop. Perfect. You get full mobility, full movement. It's very protective. And if you need to replace individual parts of that piece, it's far more cost effective than having to buy individual plates for articulated arms and get those repaired. I've just basically vomited my opinion at you, but
no, it's great, and it's different from mine, which is important because no one person is ever right. and I think it's important for everyone out there to understand there are different ways of looking at these things. What about yourself, Piers? Where do you sit on that?
So I've had poorly constructed floating arms which were made out of splint. Sorry, I've had poorly constructed floating arms that were made out of metal, just sheet to metal, barely sheet to metal. And I've had poorly constructed articulated arms, and I've had good articulated arms. I've never had a good set of floating arms, which has always put me off of them. That's not to say they don't exist. You can get some absolutely beautiful sets of floating arms from places like Arma Moscovia, Smithy Bargaration, and places like that. They look absolutely beautiful and very true to historic originals, which to me at least says they'll probably bloody work. But my articulated arms are absolutely bomb-proof. I've yet to have a rivet fail. I've had straps cut, but fortunately they've been cut after the buckle, so I've never had any failures in that regard. I think the only one failure I did have, I managed to mask as I took the guy down. But yeah, articulated arms for me all the way because of the extra protection they can provide. And it's my joints, and the main thing for me there is joints being jammed against themselves. The major injuries I've ever seen in the sport is when someone's legs or arms have gone the way they're not supposed to go, when someone's gone down or it's gone down into a mess and a melee, and that's when you tend to get your worst injuries. Or at least the ones I've seen, like your legs, when your leg moves in a way it's not supposed to, or if it overextends. Whereas the articulation protects against that, even in a small way, but something is better than nothing.
I think that's what Articular have, is it stops the hyperextension if it's made for you. But a good point that you've both made, that we need to push on every single piece of kit. The poorly made kit is awful, and if it doesn't fit you, it's no good. Like mate of mine, James Jamboy, you might remember him. One of his sayings in the sport was, saying it will do will not do in this sport. If you put a bit of kit on and it's not good, it's not great, but you say, oh, it will do, it won't do. It'll get you hurt. And that's no good. But I prefer the Articulate just because I've never felt weighed down by it so much. You can't do as much dynamic sort of swordsmanship. I don't think that's necessarily needed for Bohurt. And a little bit of extra safeness, I think, is worth it for me.
In my personal opinion, having done a reasonable amount at certain levels, I would say that it changes the way in which you can move your arm sufficiently to take you. Maybe if you have a perfectly made one that's kind of like late 15th or early 16th level, that is really, really well made, this won't happen. But most of them, I find, tend to limit the movement of your arm in such a way as to impact the way that you swing, as you said. But it does it sufficiently to just reduce impact. You can't accelerate as fast. You can't get the motion you want, and it's not as effective. And in regards to defensiveness, in my opinion, legs, I would say articulated always. With arms,
agreed.
With sorry, someone just tried to walk into my room. Can you vacate, please? I'm in the middle of a recorded call. Go away. Take the then. I don't care. Because I drank the whole thing. This.
Well, I thought I was bad with Radio Lincolnshire, but that'll do.
I'm so glad that I have a sign that says "Don't enter." I am recording, and it gets ignored. 100% of the time that gets ignored.
I had one of those when I was 16, and it never worked.
Yeah, so that was I had the entire coffee pot, so that's 10 cups. So
that's not right.
Do you need to poo?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't count. Yeah. So I'm sure you can cut this in such a way as it's.
I probably could.
You probably won't.
Probably won't. Realness is what we're about, though, isn't it? But yes, articulate versus.
Yeah. So what I was going to say about that. So with articulated legs, right? Articulated legs carry a lot of weight on top of them. So when you get hit in the side of the leg, you are almost always taking the force on the joint.
Yeah.
When you fall badly on your leg, the risk of taking weight on the joint is very high. Now, the really great thing about the arm is that it's like the worst thing you can do is fall direct on your elbow, pretty much. The chances of you falling in such a way that you are putting the joint out, I mean, I think you're more likely to shock your shoulder than you are your elbow. So for me, as someone that's moved away from articulated arms and has used even when you're hitting the arm, because you've got this kind of play on your side, your arms, it has space to move where your legs don't.
Yeah.
So I find that extra degree of protection is non-essential. And given how the rules are written, the chances of you being put in a painful hold on your arm legitimately, which there shouldn't be any way to put a legitimate hold on a legitimate painful hold on the arm, you're unlikely to get to a point where you need the articulation defense. If you're tanking halberd hits, which you shouldn't be doing, okay, maybe, but that's the quality of the make. I've done it. I've done it with floating arms, Arm and Muscovia one specifically, and it very much is kind of a case of the quality of the make of the forearm is more important than whether it's articulated or not.
Yeah, sure. And so moving away from articulate versus floating to the individual components. So you're saying about the quality of the forearms, most important. I think that it's where you'll take a lot of hits is the forearm when you've got your defensive injuries. But it's where we get onto the authenticity side of things, and how it being anatomical is really important. So if you just got your drain pipe or your vaguely flared piece, it's not going to protect you as well as if it's actually anatomically shaped. And I'm sure Piers is a bit of an AC nerd. You've got something to say there.
Well, I think Anthony's in the same bracket as me there, to be honest with you.
Nerd.
Yes, yeah. But so the reason I like my articulated arms at the moment is they are anatomically shaped, which means my arms move. I'm not 100% as you rightly pointed out, but near as damn it. And they get a lot better movement, a lot better striking power than I would do in craply made articulated, certainly. But the main thing is, with all those curves and that shape, a lot of blows glance. So some things that would come down normally, where there's just one smooth shape, or one rounded shape, sorry, it'll find purchase, it'll find something to bite against. But where those are, my current forearms are really well made and beautifully shaped, a good chunk of the blows will glance. They'll struggle to find something to purchase against, which increases the working life of my kit as a whole. Which is definitely, it's one of those things, as you quite rightly say, buy nice or buy twice. Same thing, if you bought a crap pair of arms, which has got no smooth shape, with no anatomical shaping to it, there's going to be a lot of bite points there, a lot of easy places for steel on steel contact to do damage, and then you end up buying the same pair of arms twice in the time where a normal one decent pair of arms have lasted. But yeah, one anatomical is good because it's historically accurate, and it ticks boxes for the AC committee, and it looks very pretty. But the most important thing is actually it's better protective and gives you better movement, and it gives it better life expectancy, because the sheer amount of glancing blows comparative to just biting blows on a flat piece of steel you've roughly bent around your forearm, it will pay for itself, in my honest opinion. But Anthony might well differ from me on this one.
No. You're right.
well put.
Yeah, it's the whole thing with in mechanics, curves are strong in general. So when you have curved surfaces, they tend to deal better with impacts than flat surfaces. If you've ever tried to repair or reshape an already shaped arm, you will know how hard it is to reshape it well, because it just doesn't want to do it.
Just trying to get a piece of well-shaped armor to sit on an anvil so you can bang the hole out. It's just
yeah. So if you've ever tried to either drill or punch a curved piece of steel, it's difficult.
Thighs are the worst. Thighs are the worst piece of kit to try and repair, because you just try and lay them on an anvil and they will fire away.
Yes, I mean, as a yes.
But that's for a different day. We'll complain about legs another day. But so that's forearms, and moving on to probably one of the most important parts of it is the elbow. It's a very bony part, and if you get the elbow wrong, you're going to have a really bad time.
Can I interject with something straight away?
Yeah.
One-piece riveted elbows can fuck off. Don't buy them.
So just for a bit of an explanation there, if you ever see an elbow that looks like it's made out of a cone, which is literally one piece where they've pulled the sheet across and put a rivet in it to put it into place, that's the type of elbow he's referring to. And he is correct. They can, in fact, fuck right off.
They can be well made, but the thing is, for usually they only cost about 10 to 20 quid less. And they are, I mean, they dent. I find they dent really easily, and as soon as those rivets start coming off, it's done.
It's because they're bent and not forged.
Yeah, I mean the dished elbows are really, really, really good in comparison, and the price difference.
Elbows, hopefully. To be a nerd
Yeah.
about it before fucking Dan Winter gets in the comments.
Oh right, yeah, sure. I'm not a blacksmith. What do I know? I
Neither
make
is he at the
the
moment.
rivets go in. But yeah, honestly, if a blacksmith, if you buy them as stock and you're buying them as a cheap fill, that's kind of fine. But because I mean, they tend to fit people more readily anyway.
Yeah.
But if you are going to a blacksmith and he says, "Oh yeah, I can make you these elbows, they'll be great." Nah, he just wants to save time.
Yeah, fair one. And I'll add on to that I personally don't like any of the really pointed elbows. They look like aggressive and like something awkward wear and Blood Bowl because you can stab someone.
Do you not like elbow
whatever.
strikes?
You're very rarely going to be lunging forward with your elbow, and for me, it's more of the maneuverability in a grapple and them getting caught on. I mean, we've all looked at them and gone, oh, that would really hurt if it was poked in a really soft bit of speed, but it doesn't happen, and you're more likely for it to get snagged on something and have a bit of a paddy.
Well, I mean, if you have a long elbow that's like 2 inches long, let's say it's about that size, and it comes off your elbow like that, and someone hits that with a halberd or even a falchion, the lever is so big that you're going to tear that your straps will come off. I mean, you have such a good opportunity, or they just grab it, which they're not meant to do, but
just put your hand on the bottom of someone's shoulder and just lever.
Yeah, I mean, when it's big enough that you can cradle it in your hand without closing your fingers, it's debatable as to whether it's grabbing or not. But from the experience of someone who had a massive pair of pointy elbows, the worst thing is when it gets stuck in the list. Like, it embeds in the wood, and then you're kind of like, okay, because it happens even if you just lean on it and you weigh like 120 kilos in gear and you lean with that, it just embeds straight in, and then it'll catch on something, and it's
snags.
They are
snags. The less of those you can have on your kit, the better.
Yeah, and it's also quite good to not have it penetrate its way through your suitcase when you're traveling.
Also, yes.
Yeah.
Talking about snags.
Ridiculous conical elbows still about, but most people have got sensible elbows, fortunately.
Talking about snags, that takes us, I think, nicely onto the other important aspect of the shoulder, and that's the leaf. Again, as the theme we've had with shoulders and the elbow there is bigger isn't always better.
No, it's not.
In armor, big isn't always good, and I find the subtle, well-shaped things always work better. I've had armor with massive leaves, and I was like, oh, that will really protect me no matter what I do. It didn't. It just made it hard to move.
Well, the thing is, big leaves, yeah, they do really snag. And the thing is, the bigger the leaf, the flatter they tend to be as well. Like, you don't tend to get... Yeah. It's... no. They just need to be... It needs to be sufficient that when you close your elbow, you've got this kind of heart shape here that's sealed. And when you open your elbow, you shouldn't be able to hit inside the dip here. So it should sufficiently cover to protect your elbow when it's open and create a close when it's closed. And that's floating or articulated.
It's difficult to talk about how it should look, isn't it? But we've all known it. When you put on that arm that's made for you and you close your arm and it looks like one homogeneous piece, you know, it's difficult to explain. But a big leaf will stop you doing that.
I mean, I made the joke earlier. Don't buy jousting kit for foot tournament, please.
So Anthony's not wrong. Some of the ones that showed up in the earlier end of the sport were absolutely ridiculous. And people thinking, oh, it would protect my gaps. And what it meant is they couldn't grapple, they couldn't strike, couldn't use their shields most of the time because the petal would get in the way. And then most of them would quickly angle grind them down, make them look somehow worse, and regret the purchase.
Yeah.
I think I remember seeing a set that had I think you nerds can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think it was the old War of the Roses elbows where it had an additional elbow that was riveted over for jousting to put the extra leaf onto it.
Yeah,
there's things like that. And...
What it is, it's there's a pinhole and then there's a hole in the extra piece, and then they just put some wire in it. But if you want to go completely mental, they've got entire external sheaths which are solid metal which go over the armor.
The old jousting hip plate thing.
Yes, and I think it's technically that is for the tilt.
Yeah, medieval ablative armor.
Yeah. And that's also where you get some completely absurd things like vanity spikes on feet.
Yeah, where do you sit on articulating elbows to forearms, though, for floating kit?
For floating kit, I mean, I would say with leather, yes. If it's one of those kind of mid 14th century kind of like, it's I know they had it for knees where you had like the knee and then a slight upper section and a lower section that's just articulated by itself, and then maybe you had other leg protection if you wanted to. It's like a whole piece of armor that goes over some other bits. I don't think I've seen that in I don't think I've seen that on arms. I can't remember seeing any.
I've seen a few elbows articulated to forearms with 2 or 3 lanes.
What, with no upper connection?
Yeah.
I think that can definitely work, but I'm not sure. I think the biggest weak spot on when you get hit in the arm is just above the elbow protector. Anyway, that's where all the injuries have come for me. When I get hit here or in the tendon, I still have a tendon lump from like 2 years ago, and it's like you get hit on the arm and it glides down and into the cup. Now, but then also the articulation at the top is what causes the mobility restrictions. Because as soon as you do that, then you find that the upper arms mounting starts to really tug, and that's what causes a lot of mobility issues.
You see, that's where the leather belts come in.
Yeah,
swings
only
around
if they
about,
consent, Piers. Only if they consent.
But the upside of having the leather strap that runs internally from the elbow up the upper arm and into the shoulders, if nothing else, I know you need to maintain it, etc., but it gives it removes that solid piece of articulation from the elbow to the upper arm and allows your arms to move but stay in a relative distance and paths of motion to each other that are predictable and you are used to.
Yeah, I can see that. I personally don't think that the space between the elbow and the forearm needs articulation exceptionally enough to I would say either if you want that, then you should be going full articulated anyway. I don't think there's enough of a vulnerability there to warrant specific articulation of those components and not do the rest, if that makes sense, in my experience.
No, doesn't it?
So that's the big points of arm harnesses at the moment. Something that's been brought up is that we never tackle Eastern kit, and we're not going to really.
It's because awful.
Eastern kit is what? You wear a bazoo band, you break your elbow, you get Western. Isn't that the rule?
Yep, that's traditionally the way it's done. People buy Eastern because they think it looks pretty, get hurt by Western.
Well, let's just for a moment actually we can talk about why it's a bit awkward, because that is actually helpful.
Yeah.
So you have your bazoo band. A lot of people who wear bazoo bands put rondels on the elbow because
they realize it's not protecting them.
It's cavalry armor. Like, come on. They often have huge fabric armors, which then has metal underneath, which doesn't necessarily close over the bicep, which is why you end up with lots of gaps. So, and then for Bohurt, you have to make that bigger anyway to try and actually cover properly. And I mean, it can look good and it can look kind of cool and nice. But I think that there are some Eastern armors which legitimately have the opportunity to work. Like Cumin has proper bicep protection and not any of this flappy stuff. And also talking about Eastern is a little awkward because there's like 20 cultures, different armors.
Yeah, it's the thing for me is it's a Western thing that we compete in, and Eastern armor creeps into it, but West is best because it's what it was built for it, and it was built for the Western kit.
Well, I mean, the reality is that a lot of Eastern armors require wearing Western armor beneath it. There is almost no authentic leg protection at all. No. And the main thing is there is no elbow protection in Eastern kit that is appropriate. Somebody did, I think Bohurt Tech made a safe Bazoo band which had articulation like a hidden cop, and it got banned in seconds because it just looked like a Western arm with some weird shaping.
So basically, remember, kids, West is best.
The only reason East was kicking about in the early days of the sport is because it's easy to make comparative to articulation and getting the anatomical shape of Western kit.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot cheaper. So for a lot of people, it was their first set of armor was Eastern kit. But as I said, the armorers have come along so much since then. The price has dropped so much since then. And there's so much decent secondhand kit kicking about that actually that's just a very expensive mistake that you don't need to make anymore.
Absolutely. So to move on from the arm harness now to what is probably next to helmet, the most important piece of kit to get right, and that's your gauntlets. Your hands, man. Like everyone who gets into Bohurt says at some point, I need my hands for work. Whether you're a spinal surgeon or you type on a computer, you need your hands. It's important, isn't it? And there's a lot of options out there. Most of them are absolutely useless. Some of them are good. So the first thing I put out there is, if you're thinking about fingered gauntlets, don't.
For the love of God, don't.
Because it's stupid. The one thing I've always said to my lads is being fingered only leads to being fucked. So don't do it. But after that, there's a few other options, whether you're scale mittens or the Tristian or anything bigger. But lads, what are your experiences with gauntlets? What have you had? What have you used?
Tristans. I've had scale mitts, and they were all right the first year we did the sport, but now it's a really good way of getting your hand broken. I've seen people with fingered gauntlets with finger plates falling off of them, and I saw them afterwards get taken out of the 30s or 21s. Can't remember what size of category it was, but they got pulled out of those and then went to the back of an ambulance. The only gauntlets I've ever seen that are absolutely brilliant are what are referred to as the Tristan ones, and there's a lot of variants on a theme there as a group, but they're absolutely brilliant. I, for some reason, I can't tell you why, when I was fighting Ukraine, saw a halberd coming towards me, and instead of putting my shield in the way, decided to try and punch it out the way. I can't tell you to this day why I did that. I just remember seeing my fist going up in front of my face and me thinking, why? But my hand is fine. So yeah, they're absolutely bomb-proof. They're what everyone else, they're what all the good people wear, and there's a reason for it. It's bloody good.
And yourself, Anthony, what are your experiences?
Well, I began with fingered gauntlets.
Did you get fucked?
No. I wore a rondel over the fingers. I did longsword competitions in those. No problems at all. I got some Milanese style fixed hourglass mittens that the cuff snapped off. Didn't ever. I think I've still got those under my stairs. But they were garbage basically. And then I then for a very long time used chainmail mittens.
Say what?
I had chainmail mittens with safety plates.
As a member of your team, I think you'd take great issue with that.
I know.
There's a lot of people
that I would take great issue with that.
It's very good that you're coming here to say this in a safe place, but how do you feel about those gauntlets now?
I I think I have one that's still a shield gauntlet. I still use it as a shield gauntlet, but I've rearranged all the plates with overlap for reasons.
There wasn't overlap in the first place.
For reasons I will explain to you after this podcast. There's actually stuff behind it I don't want to put on recording, so I'll explain to you after the podcast. Let's just say that those they were banished to the depths of hell. Now,
like shield mitts are different to sword mitts, or if you've got pole arms, like both of them. Both of mine at the moment are Tristan's, but I'm going to swap my left one out for a shield mitt because it's a lot less mucking about to get it in and out of a shield strap.
Yeah, it just needs to be covered enough that if you lose your shield, you don't get removed from competition.
So the shield mitt is a good point to bring up because I've seen some very stripped down ones, and you got a good point of you can lose your shield. It's not illegal to rip a shield off, and shields do break. They're only held on by a washer and a bit of leather at the end of the day. I've seen some that were almost the entire back of your hand is exposed and the wrist and everything, and I don't like it. My gauntlets fit well behind my shield, so I've never needed to drop them. And I always hate the idea of being sat down for an armor failure. But for a shield gauntlet, what have you guys looked at?
So when obviously just to finish off my gauntlet, I've now been on Tristan's ever since. So I have worn Tristan's under a regular shield, which makes your wrist mobility garbage. I have worn Tristan's underneath bucklers with the buckler strapped to the Tristan, which works very well for some close quarters materials. But the thing with that is if you lose the shield, you lose the gauntlet 100%. And so those gauntlets I previously mentioned, which are mittens with plates, those are actually perfect for putting under a shield because there's plates on the top that are non-obtrusive. There's plates on the fingers, and if you got hit in the hand once, the chance of a break is very low. If someone pinned your shield down open and someone came in with a two-hander, you would lose a lot of your hand.
You should probably just take a knee at that point, but
well, the trick is to not let them.
Yes.
But it is a very rudimentary homemade version of what a lot of people buy. And there's two that you see for sale. And one is it's like a cut down plate mitten that's not authentic in any way, shape, or form, but is allowed under safety rules. And then if you lose the shield, it's got plates on the back and you can continue fighting. And then there's the other one, which is it's kind of enclosed here. You've got an oversized thumb.
Yeah.
And there's nothing on the back. And if that comes off, you shouldn't be allowed to continue fighting, but often people are. And I often see those like hard attached to shields, like people tie them on because frankly, you don't want that to come off. But those tend to be more protective than most gauntlets, and they've got wrist protection and stuff. Because some people don't wear forearms under their shield.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of that. Because again, if a shield breaks, it's not even about getting hurt; it's about getting sat down for me.
Yes, I when I started, I wore a right forearm, right gauntlet. On my left hand, I wore a shield gauntlet. And I had some plate on my forearm to stop me from being sat down, but it was not combat safe.
No.
So it was just on paper fine. That was 2015. That's fine.
This is a big thing we often need to talk about with people is there's what's on paper fine, and then there's a competitive fine, and ultimately you really do need to look after yourself because if there's the marshal will let me stay standing up, and then there's like if you're standing up, I'm going to hit you there, mate. I might feel bad about it, but I'm going to hit you there, and that like little things can have an impact on your life if it is a break or a tendon or anything. You just got to look after yourself.
Well, let's just say that everyone that threw a small upset over the legal requirement to wear an under helmet neck protector has clearly not seen what happens when a two-hander hits under the neck. It might be illegal, but that red card won't fix your paralysis.
Being illegal doesn't stop accidents either, does it?
It happens, yeah.
It's the biggest thing I'll ever get out to anyone listening there, thinking about doing the sport or looking at new armor, is protect yourself. It's the most important thing, because I protect myself and I want to be able to hit you as hard as I can, as much as I can, and I don't want someone crippled at the end of it. The best result out of any Bohurt is you have a good clean win, and after it you'll go have a drink and you're all happy with each other. People getting injured, people getting hurt, it's not part of the fun, is it?
No.
But with gauntlets, the big thing we come there is the Christian style, which I think was originally, what was the Smith that made those? Was it Armory Smith? Art Armor. It's the first one, and then everyone
it has been
similar iterations.
Yeah, so I believe Bohurt Tech are a licensed reseller, and they do modifications, I believe. And they even do a more protective mitten called the Mitston, which has an articulated wrist. And I've never seen anyone wear those, but they're like well, I mean, Tristan's are technically 16th century anyway, but
I think there's an issue with articulated wrists with authenticity at the moment, if you're correct me there.
I was going to come into there. So there's a level of articulation that is allowed, which tends to be the mechanical way of looking at it is there's a singular hinge in the wrist. So there's a singular point where the wrist and the cuff that's protecting, like moving away from your hand, and your hand are hinged upon. That's fine, but you can't have a hinge onto a piece of metal onto another hinge via rivets. So you can't have like a 3-section cuff or a 2-section cuff.
Yeah,
the cuff has to be one piece. The hand has to be one piece.
The
Mitston as a singular.
The Mitston is very 17th, 18th century, so it's out of scope. But it's built for like sports safety, and this existed before authenticity started securing what was and was not permitted. And the fact that Tristan is permitted with a 17th century hand articulation, thank you, safety first.
It's something we came across with our video about authenticity. They're willing to make compromises for actual safety when there's no other option, because if I had to wear if we had to wear the kit fight in the sport, it wouldn't be worth it.
If we had to made everyone wear
with the kit we wear, we'd all get broken hands.
Yeah, because you put your shit gauntlet in front of me, I'm going to hit it. That's how it works, and it just wouldn't be worth it.
A lot of people didn't wear gauntlets in those time periods as well.
Yeah. But authenticity is a different kettle of fish, and where it doesn't apply completely to gauntlets is an amazing concession in my eyes. But guys, is there anything else about gauntlets you wanted to get out there?
Fixed or swivel thumbs. So depending on the gauntlet, you can get some that come back to a single rivet just behind the thumb, so you can move the thumb much more freely. And you get some where the thumb, the back end of the thumb, where it attaches to the hand, that is solid in the actual hand of the gauntlet.
I think it's got to be articulated now by the new authenticity, doesn't it? You can't just have that one piece of steel that comes out and around. It's got to be an articulated thumb.
I've not picked that up actually, so my apologies there, especially as a potential AC rep. That's poor.
It's all right. We'll just put a big fucking cancel over that.
There's two components to it. So there's the whole solid thumb, which is like not really a thing. That is definitely not allowed. But what Piers is talking about is, so where you have the connector here, you can either have the metal starts here. The metal starts here and it's riveted here.
Okay.
Or the hand comes down like in fingered gauntlets and covers here. On my Tristan, for example, it's riveted here and the whole thumb is a single piece that you can move quite freely. Whereas on other people's, it starts here and it's just articulated down from there. So you don't have this motion.
So I have the latter and you have the former.
Yeah. And I think most of the non-Armour Smith ones are done with the static. The static thumb, or it's riveted in such a way that it might as well be the static thumb.
Yeah. But I don't think it causes much of an issue either way, to the point that I've not noticed it too much to have an opinion on it. So
I've seen the odd person's thumb get bent backwards in an awkward fashion, and that's what made me go for the more fixed thumb. But that was early days, and I've not seen that recently, even in people who have the more freer moving thumbs. So it could have just been technique or lack thereof, or just crudely made equipment, quite frankly.
Yeah, and there's also an element of bad luck as well, because in most cases, your hand's on a shield like that, and your hand's on a weapon like that. So the only time I, as a fighter, open my shield hand a lot, and this is something that not a lot of people do because I like open palm manipulation.
Yeah, just push on something or.
Yeah. Because I mean, I'm not talking about grasping, but I mean, if I have a choice between trying to hook my wrist around the back of someone's head or opening my hand and just
just using
it like this,
your heel to push.
Yeah, I mean, it's all
contact.
legitimate, and fighters that use two-handed weapons do this all the bloody time. So, the thing is, if you open your palm and then something hooks here, then you have a problem. But if your hands are closed all the time, which most people using Tristans on both hands will not be opening their hands.
No.
Let's be completely honest about it. It's unlikely. So I think the chance of seeing like finger injuries through mechanical going in the wrong direction is limited. But I can imagine it's happened at some point.
And something else to say about thumbs, like I've not seen it be an issue for a long time, but you've got to have that enclosed thumb.
Yes,
like, they are standard most of the time these days, but occasionally you see someone with the, like I know my first pair of gauntlets just had plates along the back of it, and it had nothing there, and it got bust open loads of times. But like I say, it's pretty standard now, and it's hard to find Bohurt gauntlets without the enclosed thumb.
Still worth keeping an eye on though. If you've got just a singular plate on top of your thumb, as you say, Barney, the metal will take the impact and it will just transfer it straight into your thumb, which is pressed against another large metal object.
Yeah.
The two bits of metal aren't moving, your thumb will go squish, as yours did.
As it did a couple of times.
Oh, there's another thing as well. When you get gauntlets that aren't made for you, so when you close your hand with a mitten gauntlet, the metal should be about here. You know, it chills out there. The top plate sits on top of the metal there, and your fingers are on your hand. So if anything hits there,
inside
metal. Yes. What it does not do, if you've borrowed somebody else's and your metal stops here, and your fingers go over the metal, and it doesn't line up. If your hand is closed on something and you've got this metal sheet there, and you get hit with a two-hander on your
don't have meat hanging out. Oh.
Yeah, I'm aware of someone that's in training has had fingers broken, just from not from the hit per se, but from the actual gauntlet plate. The fingers had nowhere to go, so the gauntlet plate just went in and acted as kind of like a chopping edge with the pressure of the hit.
This is why the general advice always is the first things you buy for yourself are your helmet and your hands.
Good pair of gauntlets. Yep, the two things you can't do without. Yeah. Oh yeah, and a box.
Helmet, hands, horn, sorted.
Yeah.
You borrow the rest of it.
Okay.
No, I think you're very wrong. I think the right path is to buy 8 polearms and 2 swords. Because that's what everyone does. They just go buying weapons every time.
I want a sword. Like, mate, I've got enough swords to equip the entire team. Buy a helmet. No, I'm going to buy a sword.
You and me both.
Okay, mate. Cool. I could have given you a sword.
It's reliably like, I'm going to get into the sport. I've just bought 2 axes. All right.
You're not using a halberd. Put that down, please. But yes, lads, thank you very much. Is there anything else you want to get out there about anything from the shoulder down?
No, I think we've covered it all quite nicely. Although we'll find out in the comments, I don't doubt.
Brilliant. Right. Thank you very much for your expertise and your experience there, lads. And for those of you at home,
pleasure as always.
Please like, subscribe, and if you disagree with us or have anything else to add, put it in the comments below. I'll be glad to hear from you. And keep an eye out because I am putting a t-shirt out soon for the Battle of the Nations to help fund the battle bus and everything going over. So if you're interested in that, check out the link below. We'll also try and link the armorers we've spoke about today below. Thank you all very much for listening, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you very much.